In the 7th and final episode of this series, we'll be doing some simple compositing within Blender, then rendering our final animation. I'll also walk you through how to convert your video file into a looping GIF. If you find yourself enjoying this tutorial, consider checking out my premium classes on Skillshare. I'm excited that I can offer everyone a completely free month of premium Skillshare membership by using the link in the description and comments below. I have 9 unique classes focused on many different aspects of Blender, like my Model and Animate a 3D Logo class. With that out of the way, let's proceed with the tutorial. Our first step is going to be to render a single still image of our portal. So to do this, we're going to go up to our rendering tab here at the top. We can click that, and that'll switch us to our rendering workspace. Now we can go up here to the top left where it says render. Click this, and then we can choose render image, or you could just hit F12 on your keyboard if you'd prefer that. So I'm going to click render image. And we'll see here our image starts to render. We can zoom in a little bit on it as well. And then once it hits 200 samples up here, which is the samples we set originally for our max samples for the render, it'll finish the image. And that's when it'll begin the denoise process. With this test render done, we can finally get a good look at our portal. We can see how the volumetrics and the depth of field improve our render, but there's still more we can do. Let's begin the process of compositing effects onto our final image in Blender. We can do this by going up to the Compositing tab here at the top. Let's get this workspace set up so it's a little bit more useful to us. So to start with, hover over the top viewport and hit N to hide that side menu. We won't need that. Now go up to the top right corner, wait until your mouse turns into a plus sign, and then drag it over to make a new viewport. We're going to switch this top right viewport into the image editor by clicking this little symbol here and then choosing image editor. And then the top center, we're going to click this little drop down and we're going to choose viewer node. Now over here on the left side, click this button that says use nodes. And now we can actually see our render pop up. You should notice right away that this looks really similar to the shading workspace when we were applying textures to our portal, with the nodes, sockets, and wires. Let's start by adding a brand new node. We're going to hit Shift and A, just like before. Click Search, and we're going to type in Viewer. So V-I-E-W, and then we can see Viewer. And we'll click and place this. We'll see right away everything here turns black. That's okay, we'll fix that in a second. And we're just going to drag from this image socket on our render. We're going to drag it into the image socket on the viewer node. And now as soon as we've done that, we can see our image here on both sides. Now we don't really want to see it over here on the left, so we can click this backdrop button to hide it on the left side, so we only see it over here on the right. And then we can zoom out on the right side so we can see the entire image. The default way to work on your image is actually to use this backdrop here on the left and just have your nodes sitting on top of it as you work. I find that kind of annoying to see all these nodes sitting on top of it. I can't really see my image very well. So I prefer the method where we put it over here on the right side. I actually learned this method from Blender Guru during one of his tutorials. So let's uncheck the backdrop, and then we can space these nodes out here just like the shader editor. We can make some more room because we're going to be adding more nodes here in the middle. So at this point you might be asking yourself, what is compositing? So compositing is basically just the process of applying additional effects on top of the base image. So we're going to be adding something called glare, and we're also going to add something called lens distortion. And these are just additional effects that are applied after the image has already been rendered. Let's start by adding our first effect, which like I said is glare. So we'll hit Shift and A on this left viewport. In our search bar, we're going to type in glare, G-L-A-R, and then you can see here, glare. So this node here, we're going to drag it between the image and the viewer node here. So once this line highlights white, we can just click and drag that. And now before we do anything over here, which we can see all the effect that it's doing, we're going to drag this image socket from the glare node over to the composite node as well. So we want it plugged into both of these. Now let's zoom in here on the glare node, and we can see all the different effects that it has. So firstly, you'll notice on the right side, it's added this kind of crazy starburst glare, sort of lens flare look to our image, which looks pretty cool, but it's not quite where we're going for yet. Luckily, we can change the settings here to make this look different. So there's a few different types of glare. Right now it's defaulted to streaks, but there's also ghosts, which does this kind of echoey, kind of overlapping image effect. And then there's simple star, which is pretty similar to streaks. It's just has a few different settings here. And then the one we're going to be using is if we click up here where it says simple star, we're going to choose fog glow, which is the most simple of the effects, but it's also, in my opinion, the best looking. So what this does is it just adds a subtle kind of glow around our objects. You might also see this referred to as bloom in other parts of the interface. Now let's begin adjusting some of these settings here. So we're going to start by just switching the quality here from medium up to high, so it's a little bit more accurate as to where it places the bloom on the image. Now we can go down here and set the size to 9, which is actually the max for this slider. So by default, this slider goes as low as 6 and then up to 9. I'm not quite sure why it's such a weird slider. I'm sure there's a good reason, some sort of mathematical reason, but it's a 6 to 9 slider. We're going to set ours to 9, which is the max. And this is just basically how large is this glow around it? How prominent is it? And then the last setting we're going to change is this threshold. So threshold is basically, it's kind of determining where this bloom is going to be applied. The higher this number here, the less places that are going to be bright enough to trigger this bloom. So it's only going to look for places that are brighter than the value. As we lower this value, it's going to look at more and more of the image and find areas that aren't quite as bright as what was originally set for the threshold, and it's going to apply bloom there to them as well. So we're kind of increasing the amount of bloom the lower we make this number. So we're actually going to set ours pretty low because we're going for a really glowy kind of stylized look. We're going to set it all the way down to 0.1 and then hit enter. So this is going to apply bloom to almost all of our image. Pretty much anything here that's glowing is going to get bloom. Even some of the brighter reflections will catch some bloom as well. Now in areas here where they're pretty dark, they won't get any bloom, so that's fine. But we can see the difference here. If I switch this back to 1 and then hit enter, you can see how much less bloom we get. It actually makes the image, in my opinion, look worse with less bloom. It really kind of brings this portal to life when we have more of it. So I'm going to set the threshold down to 0.1, so as much of the image as possible can get bloom. We won't be really adjusting this mix slider at the top. It's basically just for you to isolate the amount of glare or bloom that's in your image. So if you set it all the way up to 1, it's going to completely remove your image and basically just show you the areas where the bloom is showing up, the glare. Now this might be good for you to kind of troubleshoot and figure out where the glare is actually showing up. So we can see here it's showing up on some of these brighter reflections, but not in other places. And then if you set it to -1, it'll completely remove the glare from your image and just show you the basic image. We're going to set ours back to the default, which is 0, which means it's perfectly blending the two and just putting the bloom on top of our image. With a little glow added to our image, let's add one more effect to increase the distortion around the edges of our frame. So we're going to zoom out here on the left. I'm going to click and drag on these nodes and move them over so I can make room for the next one. Now we can hit Shift and A, go to Search, and then we're going to type in Lens, L-E-N-S, and we're going to choose Lens Distortion. We can click this, and again, we'll just drag it onto this bottom yellow line first. And then we're going to click from the image socket on this new node, and we're going to plug it right into the composite on the top. Now we'll notice after plugging this in that the lens distortion node isn't actually doing anything by itself, and that's because we haven't changed any of the parameters here. The only parameter that we're going to change here is actually the last one. This is called dispersion, which is being cut off. So right here, dispersion, and we're going to type in 0.1 and then hit enter. And we'll notice over here on the right side, our image changed a little bit. It actually slightly zoomed the image in. It's not technically a zoom, it's distorting the image so that the center is a bit closer and the edges are kind of pushed away, but it kind of feels like a zoom. And then we'll zoom in here to see what it's actually done to our image. So we'll notice on the corners here, this is the areas where it's kind of pushing the corners of the image backwards. So it's giving it almost a fisheye effect. And it's also done this kind of cool sort of rainbowy chromatic aberration here on the highlights around the edges of the frame. Now this is primarily an effect that only really does stuff to the outside of your frame. So as you move towards the center, you won't really notice any effect of this dispersion aside from that slight zoom. But on the edges of our frame, we're getting these kind of fringy, kind of rainbowy, chromatic aberration, kind of distortion on the edges. Now this is an optional effect. You can either make it more subtle than this, you can make it stronger than this if you'd like to, or you can just totally eliminate this by just connecting the image socket here back into both of these and then deleting your lens distortion. But I personally really like the lens distortion effect, especially for this render here. I think it kind of adds to that kind of magical, sort of ethereal vibe that we've got going on for our image. And it only gets stronger if you make the number higher. Now it's a really touchy slider, so if we make this 0.2, oops, not 1.2, although I guess you can see 1.2, this is what it would be doing. This gives you a really obvious example of what this is doing here. It's doing that rainbowy kind of distortion I was mentioning on the edges of the frame. Hasn't really done anything to the middle. And then you can see on the edges here, it's kind of pulling the corners inward. It's kind of rounding this out and making it more fish-eyed. But that wasn't my intention here, so I'm going to set this to like 0.2. If you wanted to just make it a little bit more exaggerated, you could do that. Now we're seeing some pretty obvious like green fringing on the outsides here. And some also, more exaggerated fringes here on the sides. But I'm going to set mine back to 0.1 like I mentioned before, and we're going to leave it there. That's the last compositing effect we're going to add to the image. So this is a good time to save out a still image if you'd like to have just a still image as well as the animation we'll be rendering here in a minute. So to save out your still, you can just go on this right side here, go to Image, and then go down to Save As. And this will bring up the option box where we can choose the name of the file. So maybe we'll call this Magic Portal _still _01, just as an example for the name. And then you can change the type of file that it saves it out as. So by default here, it's chose PNG. You can also switch it to a JPEG if you'd prefer that. But for mine, I'm going to switch it back to PNG. I'm going to leave it on RGB. So I don't need RGBA because that'll include the alpha channel that isn't necessary. So we can switch it to RGB, and then the rest of the settings here are fine. And now you can hit Save As Image. And that'll save out a still image that you can then share with your friends and family wherever you'd like. With the still image saved, let's set up our animation render settings. To do this, we're going to go up here to our rendering panel. And now that we're in our rendering workspace, let's go over to our output properties, which is this tab over here on the right side that looks like a little printer printing out a photo. Now go down here to the very bottom where it says output. And now we're going to choose the default location where this is going to save the animation once it's done. So to set the save location, just click on this little white folder icon here. And then you can navigate to the location you'd like to save this animation file. And this will be a video file that we're producing. Down here, you can give it a name. So I'm going to call mine Magic Portal _animation _01, because I know this is the first version. In case I want to save out two different versions with two different camera angles, I can do that with this number here. And then I'm going to end it with a single underscore at the end. And the reason I'm adding this last underscore is because by default, when Blender saves out this animation file, it's going to append a bunch of numbers at the end that show you how long the animation is based on the amount of frames it has. So ours will say, I believe it's 000 and then -300. And if I don't put this underscore here at the end, it's just going to blend those numbers directly into the 01 that I added for the version number. So just make sure you add that underscore there as a nice little break between those numbers. Okay, with our name set, we can just hit accept. And now we can see our location is set. Now let's change the type of file format we're using. We're going to switch it from PNG by clicking on this. We're going to choose FFmpeg video. Now that might seem like kind of an odd one, but you'll see why we chose that in a moment. Now twirl down encoding. And then here where it says container, we're going to change it from the default, and we're going to choose MPEG-4. So MPEG-4 is probably something you're more familiar with, at least for a file format, more than this FFmpeg video. Further down in the video settings, we're going to leave the video codec set to H.264. And then for the output quality, we're going to change it from medium quality to perceptually lossless. So this will still be a compressed image, but it's going to be virtually compressed as little as possible so that it looks like it's a lossless quality image with no compression at all. And then lastly, we can leave our encoding speed set to good. With that done, we're ready to render our final animation. Your overall render time will vary pretty significantly based on how powerful your computer is. With my current setup, this render takes about an hour or so. I would say my computer is on the lower side of mid-range at this point, so it's likely many of you have better computers than I do if you play a lot of video games on your PC. If you find your render is taking much longer than you'd like to wait, there is a few settings we can lower to speed up each frame. The settings we would want to change are over here on our render settings. So we're going to click on this top tab here that looks like the backside of a digital camera. Now we can go down here to where it says render. And the main culprit here is probably going to be your max samples, because we'll remember the render doesn't technically finish until it's filled up all 200 of those samples. So if you wanted to make it render faster, you could lower this down to say 100. Now I'm not sure that it would exactly double the speed of your animation, but it would certainly make it faster. Another setting you could adjust would be up here in the output properties, that tab we were on before. And you could change the resolution here. If your goal is to only produce a GIF to share, you can decide what size you want your GIF to be and then lower your resolution to that. Most GIFs aren't above 600 pixels, and many are even smaller than that. So if you want to share your video file, 1080 might be where you want to leave it, but if your goal is to just produce an animated looping GIF, you could probably lower this down to 600 pretty safely, or even lower, and you'll produce a video file that's basically just purpose-built for making the GIF, and it doesn't need to render any longer than it needs to be. For the purposes of this demonstration, I am going to lower my resolution down to 600 for both of these, just to speed it up on my end, but again, feel free to leave yours at 1080 or set the resolution to whatever you'd like to. One last thing to mention about the rendering process is you might notice that some of your frames don't get all of the glare and the distortion effects applied to them. Don't worry, your render is going to still turn out fine. This is just the viewport skipping that visual feedback on some of the frames. It is still applying the effects. With all of those disclaimers out of the way, let's actually render the animation. So we can go up here to Render, and then choose Render Animation, or you can hold Control and then hit F12. So I'm going to hit this button now, and that'll start the rendering process. Blender will now go through each frame and render them one by one. You can see at the top of the window which frame you're currently rendering, as well as how many are left to go. I'll see you in just a moment when my render is finished. At this point, my animation is finished and it looks great. Hopefully your animation hasn't taken too long, and if it was, you were able to lower either the render max samples or the resolution to get it to a better speed. We have an MP4 video file saved out. Now let's convert that video file into an animated GIF that we can also share. The first thing we need to do is go to the free video converter website we'll be using. We'll be using easygif.com/maker to make our GIFs today. It's a really simple and free way to convert our video animation into an animated GIF. We'll start by clicking the Choose Files button here at the top, and then we can navigate to where our video file is saved, and then I can choose this, and now hit Open, and then we can click the Upload and Make a GIF button. Now it'll bring us to our GIF settings. So this is where we choose how we want to convert this video file up here into a GIF. I'm going to leave the size set to original up to 600 pixels, which means it'll take the original video file, and if it's larger than 600 pixels, it'll knock it down to 600, or if it's smaller than 600, it'll just leave it as whatever the original was. For the frame rate, we're going to switch this to 25. Now this is the closest thing we can choose that's not higher than our original frame rate. So we'll choose 25 frames, and with those two settings changed, we can now click the Convert to GIF button. If we scroll down the page, we'll see this little dancing cat here, which is essentially the loading bar. Okay, so our GIF is done processing. We can scroll down here to see the full GIF at its full size. We can also see the file size, which in this case is a relatively large GIF. There's a lot of different colors going on here and gradients and movement. And we can also see the size and then the frames that it has. If your GIF was generated with a pretty large file size, something like 15 up to 30 megabytes, you might want to optimize it. Luckily, this site also has a very easy to use optimize feature that can help us shrink our file size. To do this, just click on this optimize button here below our GIF. This will bring us to the optimizer. The main thing we'll be adjusting is this compression level. And we can see here that it says 30 is a very light compression and 200 on this slider is very heavy. Let's start by just using the default right now, which is 35, and then we can click Optimize GIF. Again, we'll see this little dancing cat, which is the loading bar. Now if we scroll down, we can see the newly optimized GIF, and we can see the new size. So it's reduced it by about 32%. Now in general, this optimization is only going to be able to reduce it down to about 50% of its original size. However, if you are interested in other types of optimization, you can scroll down here and read an explanation on the different types that they have. So each one of these explains the different types, and then up at the top, you can choose from this drop-down, you can choose one of those different types of optimization. In your case, different types of optimization might give you a better result or a smaller file size. For now, I'm just going to use the lossy GIF that we did before, and now I'm going to save this image. So to save your GIF, it's really easy. You just right-click on the image itself, and then choose Save Image As. Navigate to where you'd like to save your GIF, and then down here you can give it a name. I'm going to call mine Magic Portal _ GIF _ 01, and then hit Save. We now have both a looping video file and an animated GIF to share with our friends and family on social media. Feel free to share your portal renders by linking to them in the comments below. I'll personally review every project shared and give you feedback on your render. At this point, we're nearing the end of our Blender journey. I wanted to thank you all so much for sticking in there with me and seeing this tutorial series to its conclusion. I hope you found this experience valuable in learning the basics of Blender, while also making you more comfortable with the process of creating 3D art in general. As I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial series, making online Blender tutorials is my full-time job, and I couldn't do it without your support. So I want to sincerely thank you for watching my class through to the end. I primarily make my content over on Skillshare, where you can expect tutorials just like this with even more engagement and feedback during the process. As of this recording, I currently have 9 Blender-specific classes with even more planned for the future. So it's a great place to follow me if you're interested in easy-to-understand Blender tutorials. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Ring the notification bell so you don't miss an upload, and like this video so others can more easily find it. Your support on this channel really helps me out a lot. Thanks again, and I hope to see you all again soon for another tutorial series. Don't forget to click the link in the description and comments below for a free month of Skillshare. Watch my classes as well as thousands of others across a wide variety of topics. For the sake of transparency, I do receive a small amount of money if you decide to continue your subscription after that first free month. I truly appreciate the support. If you're enjoying the tutorial series so far, like the video, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're notified when I release new content just like this.